Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be featuring the Florida, the Tier 7 American premium battleship that I never really got around to reviewing, but I did occasionally play. I did give my initial opinion on it, and that was that the ship was okayish. I didn't find it that special, and honestly I still don't find it to be any sort of shining gem, especially at tier 7 when you have the likes of Sinop, for example, which is an absolute beast. But it does fulfill some niche roles. First of all, the carrier actually goes in for a strike, and this is something you probably should never do against the Florida. Florida is one of the few ships that actually has a very effective AA for its tier. He gets a strike in, of course, as do all carriers, but you can defend yourself quite effectively against strikes. They get their initial strike in, but they will basically always lose their squadron. The defensive AA combined with the high AA values means that Florida has some of the best AA at the tier. Probably the best actually with defensive AA active. The guns, however, are a bit misleading. You have 12 guns, which at first glance sounds really good, but then you realize that they've kind of artificially tuned down the damage output that you have. First of all, the reload is a pretty insane 33.5 seconds, which means running Halsey with expert loader like I am is incredibly important if you want to be switching to HE, AP, whatever. The damage of the shells has also kind of been artificially tuned down big time, namely your AP only deals 9.5k alpha. Now, New Mexico, Arizona, they both deal over 10k, I think 10.5 or so. One might be less, I think Arizona was 10.3 or so. Regardless, you basically deal 10% less damage than they do. In fact, your AP damage is the same as the French 340mm guns. And this combined with the longer reload means that your DPM is actually pretty bad. And having 1.7 Sigma doesn't seem that appealing either, but there is a pretty big saving grace here, namely the fact that the Florida has access to Battlecruiser Dispersion. That means you don't have your standard battleship dispersion, but instead Battlecruiser Dispersion, which means that you do consistently land significantly better volleys than pretty much all the other battleships around your tier. This does come with some big downsides. The guns have 356, which of course means that they are incapable of overmatching 25mm of plating, and 25mm plating is incredibly common. In fact, I found the Florida to be much more powerful in situations like this, where you're basically the top dog. You are the top dog fighting against lower tiers. Then you're very good at punishing ships that don't expect to be hit with such accurate volleys at the ranges that you can pump out. However, tier 7 is a tier that I've often said is quite cursed right now, and you end up being up-tiered frequently, and this is where one of Florida's greatest weaknesses show themselves, and that is your lack of armor. Or to put it more accurately, your lack of armor combined with your lack of healing and health pool in general. At 51.8k, I'm pretty sure you just have the lowest health pool of any tier 7 ship. I don't think there's anyone who actually has less. Even the Scharnhorst has more health than you do. So your health pool is, for tier 7, basically garbage, and more importantly, your healing is underwhelming, and you only have 3 with Superintendent 4, which is of course 1 less than basically all the other battleships. So in terms of healing potential, you are bottom of the pack. This combined with the fact that your nose is 25mm, and generally speaking you have quite unmatchable armor across the board, means that you are very easy to punish. Now, having a 25mm nose isn't quite as bad. Like having 25mm nose at tier 8, like for example the Champagne, now that's a really big issue, but at tier 7, honestly, most of the battleships tend to have 26mm of plating, so having 1mm less isn't really the end of the world. What it does mean, however, in combination with these 356mm guns, if you're ever stuck in any sort of nose-in situation, or which you end up quite a bit against the likes of the battleships we mentioned, you have the Gneisenau's, you have the Sinops, and you have the Nelsons and whatever else, you end up against them quite a bit, and they basically overmatch everything you have. Even your upper hull is 26 millimeters. You have a 37 millimeter deck armor, and the benefits of being an American battleship, but you can easily be punched through the nose. And this means in any sort of fight like that, they're going to be punching through your nose frequently, whereas you're going to be bouncing. And if you're forced to switch to HE, you're in serious trouble, because not only is the HE Alpha pretty underwhelming, they have placed the HE fire chance at 22%, which means you're probably one of the worst fire starters at the tier as well. So, and with the 33.5 second reload, which is really, really long, you are not going to be burning anything to death. In general, you want to avoid using HE unless absolutely forced to do it. Even though the AP is 356 though, the pen is actually quite good on it, provided you get flat broadsides, provided you can find them. I think you can punch through something like 400 millimeters of plating at 15 kilometers, so if you get a broadside, most of the things you face at your own tier and even higher tiers, you can Citadel, unless we're talking about extreme ranges. The ship has a really thin broadside, I think 280-ish millimeters or so, which means, of course, all the other battleships are going to have an easy time citadeling you if you're forced to give broadside. You also have a large citadel, so you just want to avoid brawling in general, because low health pool, big citadel, and no real armor. This all makes you very, very vulnerable. Add in the fact that your rudder shift is 15.4, was it 15.4 seconds, which means that you are very, very clumsy for the tier as well. So how do you play this then? I featured some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses. Well, obviously, good guns, or good pin, good dispersion, but no lack of overmatch, and generally lack of brawling capacity, lack of healing, but good AA means that you want to play kind of the way I'm playing it here. Now, you want to maintain your distance, you want to keep a certain degree of safety, you want to have an escape route available, you want to of course avoid giving broadside, and anytime someone overextends, gives too much broadside because they want to shoot someone, that is when you want to look for that punish. The reload is long, but as you can see, the punishment is also quite effective. Generally speaking, carriers will struggle to get any sort of big volleys in on you or big strikes in on you because of your AA, so you can play a bit more freely than most other battleships. Generally speaking, if a battleship splits off and goes off alone, he is very, very vulnerable because of a potential carrier strike, but you can do it in the Florida because if a carrier shows up, well, you just shoot down the planes. The dispersion is great, the shell velocity is very, very good, and as I said, even for 356mm guns, they have a fair bit of punch, and you can absolutely punish ships even across the map. All of this combined means that you want to play the ship, you want to exploit crossfires, you want to use your team, and basically you play it more like a cruiser than an actual battleship. That's really just the way the Florida plays. You can't do your standard battleship role of pushing in and tanking, you will melt instantly. It doesn't do it. It doesn't work well in that role at all. In this case though, as a gameplay example, the enemy team is basically, they're all clustered in their spawn. It's a standard battle, so camping in your spawn is very standard gameplay. The biggest mistake you can do is pushing into that cluster, which my team is kind of doing, pushing in one by one and getting themselves killed. We're obviously in no hurry to do any such things. In fact, we got a lot of teammates coming down the 9 and 10 line. We're gonna let those guys push in. The King George is joining them, so we got a huge force that is pushing in, and these are gonna cause the enemy team to go back and defend their spawn, or alternatively angle against that incoming force. And while that happens, I'm creating a fantastic crossfire. Some dude is pinging me, I don't know what he wants, because my positioning right now is fantastic. This is exactly where I want to be. If the enemy team tries to push into our spawn, I'm one of the few things defending it, and once my team starts pushing in, I'm creating a fantastic crossfire. If you look at the range, that's something that should probably be mentioned. With the spotting plane in particular, you reach a pretty absurd 25 kilometers of range, 25.6 I think, but even without it, 21.6 km range, which for a tier 7 battleship is really, really good. And this means I'm just going to sit here and see what the hell they do. If my team decides to push, then I will have to push aggressive as well. But there is the risk of this carrier striking the Ismail. So right now, I'm kind of just going to hang around with this Ismail, mostly because the Ismail is good against most things, but carriers absolutely dumpster it because it has no AA of its own. However, sticking around, popping defensive AA, setting the sector reinforcement means that the carrier going in for this strike, as you can see, will pay for it with any squadron that he sends in. It's nice to actually be able to shoot down planes, even if we're a tier higher, but it still makes a nice change, and it does give you more of that freedom that I mentioned, more of that flexibility. The Ismail decides that he actually wants to charge into them, which is a bit of a questionable move because I'm worried about the Fuso and Sinop potentially pushing up the 1 to 2 lines, and if the Ismail pushes into too offensively, he will be crossfired from there. But however, if your teammate goes in, you kind of have to go in as well, because otherwise, when your entire team is pushing, you have to push as well. Even if you don't consider it the best move, you do it because a team working together, even if the plan is questionable, is better than people kind of bailing on and basically abandoning an attack and leaving your teammates out to dry. It turns out that at least the Sinop has turned, or did the Sinop get killed? I don't see him on the minimap anymore. I think he got deleted, but the flank threat no longer exists. I still suspect the Fuso might be on the flank, but if I'm fast enough, I should be able to angle and avoid any hits from him. The Fuso gets spotted by the planes. He's still behind the island, which means I can take a shot at this Furious and angle away in time without being killed. I do take some care with enemy battleships in this thing because, as I mentioned, your Citadel armor is thin and your Citadel is huge. I instantly turn away after shooting the carrier because I know the Fuso volley is coming, and I start angling away to make sure he doesn't get any huge devastating volleys in. The angling saves me, he gets some pen damage, but no real Citadel damage, and we are still creating a very, very effective crossfire and providing some good fire support for the team. He pushes into the center, and once again, this is of course the pretty good situation for the Florida. The firing angles backwards are actually better than the one pushing, so we get some really good volleys in while at the same time creating distance. Keeping an eye out for the Sinop, making sure his guns are not pointed at me, and they are in fact pointed at me, so I'm going to be very, very careful. Sinop will easily Citadel me from this range. He gives flight broadside, so once again we go for the shot, and at the same time we make sure to angle. The only real armor we have against Sinop shells is that deck armor of 37mm. Everything else he overmatches, or the broadside he just punches through if you give too much of it. This is why I generally don't like the Florida, and that is because it is very, very one-dimensional. It is a very careful, very passive battleship. It very much reminds me of the Champagne, of the Slava, in the sense that you have to be extremely careful with it. You kind of basically you play like a cruiser, and I don't really play a battleship to play like a cruiser. It does have some great devastating volleys behind it because of the great firepower, and you can pump out some massive damage. In fact, this game that I'm featuring right now, this was, as far as I understood, the world record in damage for the Florida. I kind of just played it to show how to play the Florida, and then I ended up breaking the world record in damage. I checked through the different sites, and as far as I understood, the top record was something like 215,000 on EU, NA, and Russia, and I kind of blow that record out of the water quite comfortably. And that kind of highlights the issue as well. That's the Florida record, and it does have something to do with the ship being quite new, but I did significantly more damage in the Leon playing it just recently. So it's not like the damage in that sense is very impressive for a tier 7 battleship. It's good, of course, but there are battleships that can perform much, much better. And there are some battleships that can both be effective at range while still be absolute monsters when they push in. For example, the Sinop. The overmatch allows it to be effective at range, and if you're forced to push in, the incredible tankiness and firepower just makes it a terrifying ship to fight close ranges. Speak of the devil, he comes in. I once again try to defend myself against the carrier strikes. The idea is of course to kill off the Fuso so I can angle against the Sinop. He angles, which is a problem, as I mentioned. I cannot overmatch his nose, so we aim high, hoping to get hits on the superstructure instead, and we do get a couple of pens on the superstructure, killing him off as well. Sinop surprisingly decides not to go nose in, and the sad part here is that my team is actually capping their base, which means this game is going to end very, very soon. Sinop takes a shot. I make sure to remain very angled against those shells, and I of course aim for the Citadel. Even when angled, you saw that he had no issues overmatching me. trying to get some Citadel volleys in. Sadly only get one, a really good volley though, but that is probably going to be the last real damage I get in on him, because my team is securing this objective, and this is usually how it goes in standard battle. Either the enemy team abandons the cap, or, well, it tends to be like this. Both teams just rush the enemy cap, and then one team outcaps the other. I'm not exactly a fan of the gameplay of the standard battle, but this is a very common outcome in it. It ends in a victory. In a way, this game does showcase some of the strengths of the Florida, or some of the key strengths, and that is, of course, the consistency of the guns. 15 Citadels, not exactly something you see often in a battleship. Especially a tier 7 battleship, and that is that Battlecruiser Dispersion. Even though you might see 1.7 Sigma and you might think, wow, 1.7 Sigma, that's pretty terrible. Having that improved dispersion just means that the guns are so much more accurate. And if you can position yourself in such a way that, well, you're not basically part of the lemming train. That's the worst, really the biggest mistake you can make in the Florida, is be part of the lemming train, because ships tend to angle against the majority of ships, and then you will have no broadsides to shoot, which means your AP won't overmatch and your HE fire chance is dreadfully bad. And also, well, you have the opportunity to play this ship alone, simply because you have enough AA to defend yourself against most targets, and the ship speed is decent. The concealment is quite good at 12.4. There's no reason why you can't play this more like a battlecruiser than an actual battleship. And in that sense, the ship can be enjoyable. However, when you're up-tiered, the ship is so much more difficult to wield. And I'm not really sure if we need more of these sniper-type ships. In general, I dislike this whole move towards the sniper-type battleships. We saw the Slava, now we saw the Champagne, now we saw the Florida. And battleships already play so incredibly passive. Adding more of these ships isn't in my opinion, a step in the right direction. Team score-wise, 2,824 planes shot down, just close to getting that Kraken. But sadly, I could probably have killed all the remaining ships, but my team decided to cap them out, which was a bit unfortunate, because the problem with capping is really that when you cap the objective, it multiplies your current XP with the win bonus. And as you can see, my team didn't really have any XP, so they basically multiplied a poor XP value with the percentage, which is basically kind of pointless, which is why I tend to avoid just capping the base unless I have a really good game going. Detailed report wise, well, we only ate a few chunks, a few volleys. We avoided most of the damage. We chunked, of course, broadside cruisers, broadside battleships. Anything that is broadside, we did great damage to. If you're forced to use HE, you're in trouble. You don't want to do it. If you're forced to shoot angled ships, you're also going to be in trouble. Overall, I would say that the California is a more difficult battleship to play. It is not like a Thunder, where you can just punch through anything, and if they angle, you can just burn them to death. You lack overmatch, you lack fire chance. You also lack tankiness, and you don't handle particularly well. So it's a fairly higher skill cap ship in that sense. You will also see a lot of Floridas give too much broadside, and those things, a lot of Floridas are just going to get straight up deleted. I don't actually think the ship is overpowered. It's very niche at what it does, but I think the ship, just like the Champagne and the Slava, is a step in the wrong direction. I can show you guys my recommended build for the ship, and I'm sure this world record game will probably be outdated quite soon. That tends to happen. The ship has only been out for a month, so I'm sure someone will show up and break my record. This is usually how it goes, but we'll add it to the title for now for those juicy clickbaits. Anyways, let me show you guys my recommended build. Alright, as usual, let me start with the equipment. First of all, a turret survival, especially if your force nose in, you don't want your turrets being knocked out. Second, additional tankiness, and in the third slot, I did say that I had 21.6 km range, but I didn't really mention that I was also running the artillery plotting room. And what this does is increase your range. Now normally, on a battleship you would run better dispersion, but since you can't run that on American BBs, The other options are usually faster turret traverse. That's basically it. Faster turret traverse or range. The AA guns one is useless, and you don't have any secondaries like you would on a Massachusetts or Georgia that would benefit running them. So that leaves turret traverse or the additional range. And as I mentioned, the Florida actually benefits from the range because the guns are so accurate and they have enough punching powers to actually delete cruisers across the map. So there is really no reason not to run the additional range. Faster turret traverse could be good, but if you run expert marksman, you can already get it down to 36 seconds, which I consider already to be good enough because the reload is so long. It's not like you're going to be throwing off volley after volley after volley while at the same time maneuvering your ship. So I prefer the range. That's not to say that the running main battery would be a terrible idea. I just don't think it's worth it because the difference is 36 to 32 seconds compared to 18.6 range and 21.6 km range. So Florida is one of the few ships where I actually prefer to run the increased range. It says a lot about what I feel about the tankiness of the ship, that this is probably one of maybe like 1 out of 100 battleships where I run extra range. That's how rare it is for me to actually run this module. And finally, increased tankiness. Spotter plane instead of fighter plane, mostly because fighter plane is a completely useless consumable and you're kind of fine against planes to begin with. Not that fighter plane would actually help you in any way, it's so useless. But spotter plane does allow you to lob shells over islands, it gives you vision over things behind islands, and it makes you better at shooting ships hiding in smoke. Captain build wise, very standard American battleship captain. I run this on basically all my BBs. Priority target, adrenaline rush, superintendent, fire prevention. At this point you can, depending on how slow your turrets are, I'd probably get expert marksman first, concealment expert, then you can build in things like improved expert loader. Even normal expert loader is good, but improved is of course god tier on these battleships, especially on the Florida, because I did lambast the HE a fair bit, but with the good dispersion you can absolutely blap destroyers, which is very enjoyable indeed. And of course, jack of all trades, to at least make your healing a bit faster, even though your healing in itself isn't exactly impressive. I did mention that sadly without superintendent you only have 3 heals, so it's kind of a must-have on this ship, because in terms of tankiness this ship is poor. Armor-wise, can highlight that 25 and 26 millimeters, which means 380 millimeter guns and above overmatch all of your armor. If you try to angle like this against even a Gneisenau, he can overmatch all of your armor. Just punch straight through it. You have the 37mm deck armor, and in order to utilize this armor, you have to keep your distance, which, well, it fits its passive playstyle quite well. I can show you the size of the Citadel, which is a considerable, as you can probably see, a huge Citadel. It extends far above the waterline, and it goes from, well, behind, it covers underneath all the turrets. It is a gigantic target to shoot, and with only 280 millimeters of armor, it is not a hard armor to punch through. In fact, some cruisers will do it, and if you get up tiered, I've had an Alaska just straight up completely crush me in a fight. He just citadeled me to absolute garbage, and he angled against my AP, which couldn't overmatch him. Let's just say it wasn't a fun experience. Generally speaking, heavy cruisers can bully you around very heavily, because they can punch through to your Citadel and they can bounce your AP easily. So there are multiple downsides with this ship, the biggest one being of course tier 7 and being upmatched. Flag wise, I do recommend running the standard battleship flags. You can mix in fire chance flags, but that's not going to change the fact that your fire chance is a measly 22%. It's not going to save your HE. It is still poor. Instead, increase your speed, your healing, faster consumables, buff your already quite strong AA, and reduce fires and flooding. The AA of course relies quite heavily on the fact that the continuous damage on the mid and long range, well, even the short range, all the values are very high, and with defensive AA active and a reinforced sector, this is enough to shred most planes that strike you. The flak is great if they hit the flak, but luckily the ship does not rely on that, because the downside of flak is of course good pilots simply evade it. Overall, the Florida is a good sniper. I wouldn't say it's a good battleship. It's a good battlecruiser. That would probably fit its role better. You can't look at the ship as any other battleship because it simply can't do things other battleships can. On the other hand, it has really good dispersion. The speed isn't bad at 28.4. The concealment is very competitive at 12.1 as well. This is the ship that kind of pops up on a flank and just starts blapping broadsides. That is the best way to get the most value out of this ship. It is not a bad one. I wonder actually how I perform in it. Oh, this is gonna be risky. Let's see. I haven't actually checked this. Drumroll, drumroll, drumroll. Where do we have our tier 7 Florida? Usually you should look at this before you say anything. 37 battles. I did say I played it a fair bit. 65% win rate, 102,000 damage. I do consider that a pretty good value because I only play solo, and of course the downside of playing tier 7 is that you are continually up tiered. In comparison, I also played the Nagata quite a lot. Okay, well, I like the Nagata more because it has bigger guns and it can fulfill the battleship role better, which means I feel it up tiers better. But that does not mean that the Florida is a poor ship by any means. Being able to put up a 65% solo win rate means that the ship absolutely has some carry power, especially in the current state of matchmaking. Anyway, that was my Florida commentary. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and as always, I will see you guys next time, probably for one of those cruiser positioning vids. I hope you guys have been enjoying them, but I'll try to feature one on aggression next time. Anyway, if you like the content, feel free to drop a sub. I do appreciate it. I will talk to you guys next time.